Well, good afternoon and welcome to this seminar on wonders of the deep. We've got three really good talks coming up. But just before that, and just to make a little bit of time for other people just to come in, I just want to go through a few parish notices. We're going to have the three talks. If you would like to ask questions, put them in the chat. Sometimes we may take them if it's very specific to a paper, but I think mostly we'll probably take them at the end if that's okay with everybody. Um, Dates for your diary. The next seminar after this one is on the 25th of March, 4:30, and that's on Seaside Gardens. We then have a seminar on, and that is now up on the Seaside Heritage Network website. So if you want to book on, you can start booking on to that one. The one after that is on the 6th of May on roller coasters and amusement parks. That one's not up on the website yet, but if you want a date for your diary, the 6th of May for that one. We're then having an in-person event on the 26th of June at Saltdean Lido, just near Brighton. This is this year's event following up from the one we did last year that we held up at the Charterhouse in London, and we're doing it jointly with Historic Buildings and Places. And it's going to be a whole day seminar at the Lido. Chance afterwards to, if you want to go for a swim, and then some sort of chips and chat sort of reception event after the seminar after that. Then we have a seminar coming up on the 8th of July, which is not on the website yet, which is at the moment entitled Murder at the Seaside, but more about that in due course. And then the big day out is going to be on the 18th of September, and we're doing that in Scarborough this year. And I think Anya is going to put a link in the chat to the bucket and spade list. If you want to nominate anything for the bucket and spade list, it should be in the chat. So I'm looking at the chat as well. And yes, so Anya's put that a link in the chat there. And if you want to put forward things that you find to be dear, to be interesting, to be essential for the British seaside, then do go ahead and nominate the thing, the place, the activity that you think is distinctive of the British seaside. And on that topic, I want to share with you something that I've just been up to. I have put into, I have completed the initial expression of interest on the Living Heritage call for expression of interest for places that are distinctively part of British living heritage. And to that end, I have put the seaside holiday, not visiting the seaside, but the idea of the seaside holiday on. And as part of the process, I want to get you to support me in this kind of crazy idea that I've come up with. And so in the link, I've put a link to the UK's UNESCO website, the expression of interest that I have submitted, and lastly, a short form, and I mean incredibly short, three or four things. If you could fill that in, complete it, and say why you think the seaside holiday should be part of Britain's sort of recognised living heritage, that would be a great way of me sort of gathering evidence to support my crazy idea that we can get the seaside holiday as part of our living heritage and maybe one day the world's living heritage. So I think that is most of my parish notices, apart from one bit of news. The Seaside Heritage Network is now a registered charity. So we are a real thing. More to come in the future on that subject. So I think that's everything I meant to say. I'll be corrected by somebody in a moment, but I want to just now start the seminar proper. The topic is Wonders of the Deep, and our first speaker is Dr. Bryce Stewart, Associate Professor of Biological and Marine Sciences. his background is an upbringing in Australia and Papua New Guinea. He's just back from Australia, and so welcome back to the UK. This inspired him a deep fascination of a love of the ocean, and ended up with him following his career as a marine ecologist and a fisheries biologist. He has a BSc in zoology from the University of Melbourne and a PhD marine biology from the James Cook University before moving to the UK in 1999. He is, I think I'm right in saying this, Bryce. I'm right. You're partly with the University of Plymouth and also a senior research fellow of the Marine Biological Association.
Yeah, that's it.
30 Plymouth, 70 Marine Biological
That's it.
Association.
Perfect.
And today he's going to consider the social and cultural importance of the UK's coastal fishing fleets. So, a little bit of background to our fish and chips. So, over
Thanks
to you,
very
Bryce.
much,
Thank you.
Alan. Thanks so much. Great to be here. Especially, I can now see there's over 100 people online, which is fantastic. So I will just share my presentation. Okay, yeah, thank you very much. So, yeah, we've just got about 15 minutes of me talking about coastal fisheries around the UK. And hopefully what I can do is sort of expand your horizons about the value of the fisheries. You know, they're not just about fishermen, they're not just about providing seafood. They actually provide a huge range of other benefits to coastal communities, to history, to the identity of those communities as well. So, moving on to that, I just picked from my various photo albums a range of photos from seaside communities, seaside towns where I've been over the last few years. Anyone who knows me, particularly my wife, knows that whenever I go to these places, I'm always taking pictures for talks. So as I said, you know, most people, when they think about UK fisheries, they might think of fish and chips. Was previously thought to be the national dish of Britain, but I think that may have now been overtaken by chicken tikka masala. But anyway, that's a debate for another time. Interestingly, about 95% of the cod in fish and chips actually comes from overseas, mostly places like Norway and Iceland, and a lot of the haddock as well. So fish and chips still a great tradition at the seaside, but that's not really what we're mostly talking about. In fact, British boats catch over 50 different species of fish, and some of them end up on our plates, but they also end up particularly into Europe, but also around the world. So they are supplying this, you know, very diverse and, if done well, low carbon footprint and very nutritious seafood. But the fishing industry and fishermen and everyone that's connected to that also provides a range of other things. So if we just start up with this flag, that's the flag of Poole, the town where I live. And hopefully you can see that it's got a range of scallops on the top. And something that I'm not sure if it's a fish or a dolphin underneath, but it's, you know, it clearly shows the connection of Poole to, you know, to fishing, and it still has a very vibrant and active fishing fleet here. We've got other places, you know, like at St Ives down in Cornwall. We've got Brixham here. This was on the Lizard in Cornwall as well. I can't quite remember, but you can see how, you know, the presence of the fishing industry really gives colour to those places. If you stop for a minute and think about if there were no fishing boats in those towns, they really would alter their appearance, and to some extent, I think definitely reduce the amount of tourism in those places as well. But as I said, the benefits from fisheries, you know, go way beyond that. I mean, this is a picture from a fish market. That one's up in Scotland, actually. An enormous amount of fish coming in from all over the North Sea, providing lots of great seafood, but also, you know, a lot of jobs in actually the processing and the distribution of those fish and other forms of seafood. Here we've got some fish stalls, but it extends as well to, you know, lots of seaside pubs sort of take their identity from things to do with the ocean, you know, the rum and crab. I'm sure there's plenty of other names we could have picked. And down in the bottom left here, we have fishermen actually fitting and repairing a net, which again, needs to come from somewhere. And in fact, the jobs that are generated by our fisheries are really quite diverse, and the other values that come from that are really quite diverse. And so in a piece of work that was done by myself, but also I think there were 20 authors on this paper that we published last year, we tried to identify all the different benefits and values that were brought in by having a fishing fleet around the UK. And, I won't go through all of them in detail, but just to really highlight that that a lot of the boats that I'm talking about are actually very small. So this is under 10 meters long or under 30 feet long. They make up more than 3/4 of the fishing fleet around the UK. Obviously, that provides jobs directly on the fishing boats. And as I said, it provides seafood as well. And if that's managed sustainably, that's food forever. But it's also been estimated that each job at sea can produce up to 15 jobs on land. So this is everything from, running the businesses, processing, selling, distributing that fish, but also manufacturing boats and fishing gear, and other things that are done to support fishing. For example, I probably wouldn't have a job if there were no fishing industries in the world. And of course, other things that should be recognised is the importance of fishing, particularly in a place like the UK, to the history, to the culture, and the fact that in a lot of sort of small, remote coastal towns, fishing is really at the centre of their identity and really binds the social fabric in those places as well. And then, of course, I've talked about the importance of tourism and how that, these picturesque little fishing towns and ports really bring in tourists, not just to look at them, but also, to have crab or even fish and chips by the seaside and maybe go out fishing themselves and things like that. So I think this is really important because in the past, it's been talked about that there's only 11,000 fishermen in the UK. It's a tiny part of our GDP. If you look at that headline figure, I've heard quotes like it's worth less than the Peppa Pig merchandise industry. There's more, there's more vicars than fishermen and things like this. That really hides the rest of the story. So it's important to really show how valuable our coastal fisheries are. And on the back of that was part of that work that I've just shown you. We, as a consortium of about however many organisations are down at the bottom of the page, have been doing work over the last few years to really highlight this value and also to gather perceptions of the public about it. And it's when you go down to the coast and you talk to people in the street or on piers and, walking along the promenade, you find there is a lot of public support for the fishing industry and for fishermen. A lot of people love to eat seafood. They also recognize that being a fisherman is a really hard job. In fact, it's the most dangerous peacetime job in the country. Most people are doing it because they love what they do. They love the freedom. They love the environment they work in. But it's not easy. And so we want to make sure that that is recognized. And that also some of the challenges that these people are facing are recognised. And this map here, which I'll try and explain relatively simply, really highlights the issue. So fishing fleets around the UK have been declining for a number of years, and that's happening for many, many reasons. So in this map, we've looked at the sort of main fishing ports around the UK. And what you notice is that almost all of these circles are either red or orange. So all of those ones indicate a decline since 2008, and the size of the circle indicates the size of the fishing industry in that particular place. There's only one area here, a relatively small fishing area in eastern Scotland, where they actually had a little bit of growth. And so this really highlights that the industry is declining. And it's actually those small boats, those under 10-meter boats that really make up the numbers that are declining the most because they are facing particular challenges that some of the other boats don't face. And something else just to highlight, if we look at this chart here, days at sea and employment, is you can see those graphs really going down, particularly in recent years. So what we identified was not only that the number of actual boats that are still active are going down, but there's a lot of fishermen only using them part-time. So the sort of full-time equivalent days at sea has really dramatically reduced just in the last sort of 10 to 15 years. There's a lot going on behind the scenes to explain this, but it does seem like the smaller boats, which are really the ones that give, coastal towns that flavor, that and going back in history have always been there. They are uniquely suffering. As I said, there's many, many reasons. There's sometimes it's actually just declines in fish stocks. Sometimes it's due to climate change. Sometimes it's due to regulations. It's due to different rules for different sectors of the fleets, etc., etc. But I'm just going to highlight a couple of them, and just because people are really interested in this. This one is a very recent challenge. This is a bloom in the common octopus, which has happened particularly over the course of last year. So we can see one of these beasts here. This is actually sometimes called a Mediterranean or a European octopus, but its Latin name is Octopus vulgaris, which basically means common octopus. It's very common throughout Europe, down into the Mediterranean, North Africa. It hasn't been common here. Apart from these occasional sort of blooms or outbursts, the last one happened in 1950. But last year, there was this incredible increase in these octopus. I recently worked out 65 times higher landings of octopus by fishermen last year than over the average from the last 10 years. So it's a huge, huge increase. Now, the big problem with this and the challenge is that hopefully you can see in this picture here, this is in a crab and lobster pot. They get into these pots and they just destroy everything. They're voracious predators. So they've been eating crabs, lobsters, scallops in particular, both in fishing gear, but also on the seabed as well. Now, some fishermen have been able to target octopus and sell them, and some of them made a lot of money, mostly by exporting them to Europe, because we don't really eat them here. But not everyone. And so overall, the fishing industry has really suffered, particularly in the southwest where this has been concentrated. Our work shows there's a very strong link with climate change that has sort of created perfect conditions for this to happen. And we predicted that it will continue in the current form probably for a few years and come back again much sooner than it has in the past. Some people may remember Brexit from a few years ago. And you may remember there was a lot of promises made about how wonderful it was going to be for the fishing industry. And just to cut to the chase, it hasn't been. In fact, I think if you ask the average fisherman today, they would tell you they would have preferred that we didn't have Brexit, despite the fact that before the referendum happened, the vast majority of fishermen would have voted for it on the basis of lots of promises from politicians in particular. The issue here again is that it has produced a few benefits for the fishing industry, but they've been very, very selective. And most of the benefits have gone to large offshore vessels. So these are particularly ones fishing for mackerel in sort of north of Scotland and to the west of Scotland as well. These are enormous boats, sometimes a few hundred feet long. The small inshore boats got almost no additional rights. And worse than that, their actual export markets have been dramatically affected because it's much more complicated and costly to export seafood to Europe and other places now. And a lot of what those inshore boats catch is things like scallops, crabs, lobsters, octopus now, cuttlefish, whelks. Yeah, we eat a little bit of that here, but the vast majority of that is eaten in other countries. And so, this is a picture sent to me soon after Brexit came into force. That's actually a lorry that was normally transporting seafood, and they drove a few of these around Westminster to sort of protest about what had happened. I was given that photo. I shared that on Twitter as it was back then, and I think it got 3 million views, which is by far the most I've ever had in any sort of social media. This is obviously, I'm not going to get into the details of Brexit, but just to say it really didn't deliver for the fishing industry what it promised it would. So what we've been doing over the last couple of years, as I said, is not just working as academics to come up with these ideas and talk about what's best, but actually working directly with fishermen. So last year we ran a couple of workshops, one in Poole and one in Whitby. I won't go through all the details here, but we had this fantastic illustrator who came to these workshops and produced this visual output of what was discussed and what was suggested, including what the challenges were, but also some of the potential solutions. But also what was really unique about these workshops is we had active fishermen at them. We didn't just pay their expenses, we actually paid them a daily rate to come. Not a fortune, but enough to make them come. Because most fishermen would rather be at sea rather than talking to people like me. But they came, they shared their views over several days, and really highlighted to us, as I said, what the challenges were, but also their ideas for the solutions and also how to prioritize them. So what we've done from those workshops is really try to bring all of that information together. And again, I won't go through every one of these priorities, but one of the biggest ones that stood out was particularly for these small inshore boats was for them to have a stronger voice and to speak collectively. And we have been working to help the fishing industry themselves set up their own network to do that. And this is just one example of a lot of things that we've done over the last few years. This is an event in Parliament last year. That was the fisheries minister at the time, Daniel Zeichner, who came up and met a lot of fishermen who we got into Parliament along with us, and really listened to them. And, he's there praising us. Unfortunately, in politics, seems like if you do a good job, you don't last very long. So he was replaced, but we're working with the new fisheries minister now. And we have a big conference, a national symposium, just in a couple of weeks in Newcastle, where again we're bringing together over 100 people, managers, fishermen, scientists, but also politicians and those creating the regulations and rules as well. So we're hoping for a really productive event there and ultimately to secure a better future for our inshore fisheries. So I'll leave you with that and also my philosophy, which I think works well in any sort of negotiations or in any works of life, which is to be more scallop. So keep your eyes open, filter out the crap, grow a hard shell, but keep a soft heart. Thank you very much.
That's a brilliant way to end. Thank you for that. I mean, I think I might be stealing that at some point.
You're
That's
fine.
fantastic. Yeah. I mean, I'm still getting over 65 times the number of octopus. That's
Yeah,
just a shocking figure. I didn't realize. I mean, I realized that, I
it's been
mean,
extraordinary.
I know that's incredible. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
if you want any evidence of climate change, I mean, that alone is quite remarkable. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so yeah, if you've got comments or questions, please stick them in the chat, and we'll come back to that because it's really important because that whole first generation of seaside resorts were ports that then diversified into
Right.
tourism. And I think it's really important to understand that so many of these ports have still got this sort of fishing base, and it's very, a real key part of the character of the British
Mhm.
seaside holiday and seaside resort. Um, Right, so I'm going to go on now to introduce Dr. Mike Benbough-Jackson, who's a senior lecturer in modern British history at Liverpool John Moores. Um, he did his PhD on the representation of the county of Ceredigion in the mid-18th century. Um, but he's also interested in what he calls strange history, storia strano, as they say in Italian. That'll be good for the transcription. And has published research on social panics, ghosts, fairies, and the Fortean times and the haunted. And today he's going to talk about speedy sea serpents, technology, fashion, and fear between the wars. So if you're of a nervous disposition, get behind the couch.
I think I'll go behind the couch first then, because yeah, some of these do get quite ugly. almost literally. I was really impressed by the octopus invasion because I was totally unaware of that, and brought to mind Victor Hugo's Toilers of the Sea, like the 1860s account of the octopus around the Channel Islands, and yeah, fascinating. I think I'm sharing, so I'll just make my screen large now. Sorry, apologies for this. The cat has left my lap, which means I have a little bit more space to move. However, I'm still a bit rusty when it comes to this. Okay, so yeah, sea monsters of the British Isles. It's something that just jumps out of the source material when I was scanning through primarily newspapers. And the stories that were told seemed a little bit different from the ones that I was used to. Obviously, sea monsters have got a long history. They still have a history in the imagination and in the minds of some cryptozoologists. Um, but what I found and what I kind of positioned myself was in this interwar period, I felt there was a shift, and there seemed to be a shift in the engagement with, the representation of, and the ideas that may well have informed uh, the sea monster in mind and imagination, and also maybe influencing how people saw things at sea. Because, of course, as we all know, it's often hard to identify objects, especially at a distance, and particularly when they're submerged. So, after explaining a little bit about what I meant by seashore monsters, there are a few categories. I try not to get lost in the seaweed there, but I'll just run through a few things. Then I'll look at three main points, really. Essentially, what was reported to have been seen and where they were seen, because that's an important part of my interwar argument that I've developed. And what did they mean? And apologies for the typo there. That looks like I've been tapping away without realizing what I've been doing on the slide, as often occurs. So let's move on from that one, and let's move on to actually looking at these seashore monsters. Well, a tongue twister there. Well, first of all, some of them are effectively known creatures, but they're still described as monsters. And this is where there's some overlap with the history of fishing and the research that's been done there. The animals which, like the octopi mentioned previously, that disturbed fishing, that reduced stocks, were commonly called monsters on that basis alone. There were also unusual sightings, and sometimes animals that hadn't been seen for a few years were seen by the shore or caught. There was a host of things. There were animals that supposedly left ships. There were Indian sea snakes that came to shore on some beaches in the south of England on occasion, be rapidly slain by spade on occasion, still described as monsters. So this monster category that I've been looking at has, yeah, a little bit of elasticity about it, but it's still fascinating to look at these ports of the strange, whether it's a known animal or not, emerging or coming onto the shore. Then there's the monsters that are unknown, which is the speculative part of this. But the sea is deep. We know a lot about the sea. We still, it's almost like a truism to say we don't know that much about the sea. What could be within it? It's deep. It's a place where the imagination can run riot, a bit like outer space. It's got that vastness which we can imagine or can be imagined with a great deal. And these monsters are known, can be pictured as mythical creatures like the kraken or the traditional ideas of the sea serpent. They may well be remnants from the prehistoric era, which is again captures the imagination, has been capturing the imagination ever since fossils have been put together, whether correctly or not, over the centuries. So the monster category is considerable. Of course, the sea serpent is, I would say, the prime monster in many people's imaginations. Though, of course, what form this takes can vary. The archetypal one, of course, has got the little loops, but they can kind of vary in shape and size depending on people's perceptions and also the traditions. We've got a host of creatures to think about. And, well, what goes on? How are these creatures brought in the environments? And I think the spotting of the sea monster is often associated with being out at sea. I mean, Carl Bell, who has written a monograph on the Atlantic and the strangeness of the Atlantic in the 19th century, primarily focuses and has focused on sailors' accounts, and clearly they are the most well known and the most often referred to, military ships as well, merchant vessels, all sorts. But what we start to see in the interwar years are not only reports from the coasts, because of course there have always been reports from the coast, but in almost an increase in attention paid to the sea monster close to home, so to speak. And that has influenced, I think, the way I've approached this, because there's a strangeness that is almost coming ashore here. And you look at the comedy, the comedic little cartoons like these description of Archie in the Manchester Evening News, the monkey there seeing what could well be a sea serpent, but turns out to be a rather collection of happy fish. Now, a school of fish and a sea serpent, porpoises, even flocks of birds, all these are explained as rational explanations for. Also, man transportation too, all can be listed as reasons. Now, it's what's made of these that interests me. I don't think debunking what was seen will take us that far, because it takes us away from how things were conceived internally. I'm a culture historian, and that is the way I kind of roll primarily. Though I'm, of course, I'm interested because the debunking of these creatures was part of the culture as well. So it's not like necessarily separate, as illustrated by this cartoon. Some of the key features then of these interwar sea serpents. What struck me is the notion of speed. Now, speed has always fascinated humans ever since they could move faster than they could actually walk. To observe something going at fast speed is particularly of interest in the interwar years, when you've got land and water speed records being broken. The automobile is again coming into a greater role. The various means of transport are capturing people's imagination. And lo and behold, the sea serpents seem to be going quite fast as well, according to people's perceptions. I've just put three examples there that might illustrate that notion of the speedy sea serpent or speedy sea monster in general. Of course, to be a speedy sea monster, you need to be traveling along the surface and to be identified as one. The estimates range up to 100 miles an hour. I have heard one claim of 100-mile-an-hour sea serpent, 70 there. The idea of them having this incredible mobility as well, and being able to turn. Of course, at a distance like that, it's difficult to gauge what they actually look like. But for those who did see the sea serpent or sea monsters, then the parallels with other animals come out. Descriptions and comparisons with hippopotami, dogs, and other kind of creatures all come through in the reports for those who are close enough to observe these or identify something that may well be nearby. That adds to the exotic nature of them. And of course, for those familiar with the dead basking shark or something, the furriness it appears that it may be covered in fur in some respects as it decomposes, and other factors that often factored in as well. Now, here we kind of go back to old legends about seahorse is in terms of like the strange creatures, kelpie and so forth. And there are resonances there. There's also the idea of the humped sea serpent. And to be honest, many of the accounts did not particularly highlight the humps. But the fact that you do get some that fit this model is an indication again of the cultural currency of these sea monster stories. Where would you see a sea monster? Well, often you would see it on the streets, which seems a bit unusual, but when you get the occasional photograph like this, and albeit not a particularly clear one, you realize that the sea serpent was part of the pageant culture, which was particularly prominent in the interwar years. We also have some examples of pageants where the sea serpent or the sea monster would be on the water. And these models And these expressions of the sea monster, this one's particularly fierce with its teeth, as you can see, are reminders of the exoticness and the magical nature of these creatures, which I wouldn't say supplanted dragons, but I think they do resonate in the context of course, we're going to come to the Loch Ness Monster before long in the context of that as well, although this example is long before well, I mean, the Loch Ness Monster attained greatest notoriety, of course, in the following decade. So we see them everywhere. We also see them on the beach. We see the sea serpent as a symbol, perhaps not as much as the seahorse as you're about to hear, but it still emerges and does appear in various forms, inflatable kind of toys and colors as described, and styles of bathing costumes too would often be described as sea serpent style. So it features in the material culture of the age. Frequently, though, when it comes to real sea monsters or what is thought of as real sea monsters, they would be observed from the coast. Now, whether this is a relationship, and I suspect it has, with leisure patterns, opportunities, maybe even the availability of certain things like binoculars, all these factors play a part. But the possibility of seeing something so exotic from the coast is obviously going to excite much interest. People on boats, of course, speedboats, increasingly popular, and an interesting pattern that I identified. I plotted about 250 monsters in the interwar years, ranging from those captured rampers and so forth, frequently predominate on the East Coast. And this leads me to the meaning and significance of this. Well, there's a lot going on here, and one of the main things is, can we know what is in the sea? And that leads to a debate frequently carried out on the newspapers, the letters, and also in public books. It's a puzzle to be solved, and that absorbs a great deal of attention for people in a world that is increasingly knowable, increasingly observable, and to a greater extent known. The sea becomes all the more exotic, even if it is perhaps less perilous in some respects than it had been. Still dangerous, of course. The key part of what I say is that there's a lot of enchantment going on here, and I don't want to go into the fascinating, though perhaps a little bit abstract debate about whether the world was disenchanted or the extent to which it was re-enchanted. But there's no doubt that the seaside in itself is an enchanting place in a number of ways, liminally and in terms of some restrictions being shifting, as was increasing the case in the interwar years. But you add the potential of possibly seeing a sea monster, or just the idea of the sea monster, and it enhances that, I'd say, tenfold or more. I can't get away from the geopolitical context, and with about 3 minutes left, it's not going to be possible for me to go into so much detail, and I didn't intend to either. But when you think of Britain's place in the world, or the United Kingdom's place in the world at this time, its position is not as it was. It was, and its successes in conflict are somehow taken away somewhat by its relative power diminishing vis-a-vis the USA, and of course, as Germany rearms. And you do start to get this feeling when you read about the sea monster, that there is a sense that the sea, which is of course so central to identities in Britain, is becoming a little bit stranger or a little more alien. Yeah, that's one of the arguments that I put forward. The waters are becoming stranger, even though they're becoming somewhat easier to traverse. They are places where not only do you have the submarines in increasing numbers, you had the submarines during the previous war. There's a strange correlation between the Loch Ness Monster and the rise of Adolf Hitler, which I'm not going to go into here again, but there's no doubt there's some kind of synergy and correspondences between this relationship with the sea, and particularly the coastal areas, and the state and position of the United Kingdom. If you want to read more about this, with a bit of theory and all that sprinkled in, it's still readable, I assure you. You can just Google that on, and you can find copies online quite easily, I think, here, there, and everywhere, where I go into these things in a little bit more detail. And I provide plenty of examples that I think may well be of interest and entertain those who would have got the time to dip into this. So I'd like to thank you for the opportunity for skipping over some of these strange things that were reported in the sea between the wars.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. That was I was shocked about the number of octopuses. I'm more shocked that there's a link between Hitler and Nessie, having grown up in Scotland. I'm going to have to lie down in a minute. I think about this. Can I just ask a very niche question, because it won't be appropriate for a bit of a chat?
Okay.
Far away from these shores, the coelacanth was discovered to exist in 1938. It had been thought to have been long since extinct. Did that sort of bubble up again, the whole idea of how little we know about the sea and the strangeness of the creatures in it?
Yes, well, when I heard about, and when I start, yes, this is interwar, isn't it? This is the time, and it's coming pretty late on. But yes, undoubtedly, it's kind of, again, it's like a bedfellow or a seabed fellow of Nessie to some extent, around that time period.
Yeah.
And yes, there's enough imagination there about the dinosaurs, and you add a living thing like that, undoubtedly so.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good link.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm a bit concerned that Necessiterus rhombopteryx has now been linked to the Third Reich. It's going to be a bit worrying for me. But anyway, so we're going to come to a hopefully slightly friendlier creature now. I'm not just talking about Kathryn, obviously. I'm talking about the seahorses that she's going to talk about. Kathryn Ferry is one of our own. She's one of our founders of the Seaside Heritage Network. You've seen her on television, heard her on radio, and seen her on these seminars. She's a historian specializing in architecture, design, and seaside culture. Her publications include books on the history of beach huts, through Victorian homes and 1950s kitchens, to the official history of Butlins and the story of Britain's largest Anglican convent at East Grinstead. And today she's going to talk about the seahorse motif in seaside architecture, which I presume is mostly early mid-20th century.
Yes, Alan, you're absolutely right. I am going to stick with the interwar period, just like Mike, and it may be that there is some interplay between these two things. I think we might have a conversation about that. But this is a kind of speculative paper, really, just because I have noticed seahorses in my research, and I just thought it might be quite interesting to pull some of this out. And I'm rather hoping that you lovely audience members might come up with other examples that you know of to add to this sort of work in progress. Hopefully you might recognise the building on the right-hand side of the screen there, because this is definitely the best known example of seahorses in decoration, and that is at the Midland Hotel in Morecambe, which was restored by Urban Splash and reopened in 2008, thankfully. I'm just going to move forward. And here we see it as pristine and new in 1933 in both of these photographs. So this was important in the bigger story of seaside architecture, because it was the first avowedly modern hotel at the British seaside. And its beautiful streamlined design really worked with the promenade at Morecambe. It was designed for the London, Midland and Scottish Railway to replace two existing railway hotels. And the architect, as you can see on the slide, was a man called Oliver Hill, who took the opportunity to employ a group of really significant artists to provide sculptural, mural and textile designs as a part of the whole commission. So really the whole building is a kind of conceived as this bigger work of art. One of those artists was Eric Gill, who at this point was in his 40s and was already a well-established sculptor. So his famous depiction of Prospero and Ariel was put onto the entrance of Broadcasting House in London. That was begun in 1931. So by this point, he's a well-known figure, and he was approached by Oliver Hill in June 1932 to sculpt 2 figures on the exterior of the hotel and carve a stone relief in the dining room, both of which were executed in the spring and summer of 1933. I don't know who came up with the seahorses, whether that was Oliver Hill who said, this is what I want, or whether it was Gill, or whether it was the 2 of them together, and that would be very interesting to find out. But these seahorses were carved in situ from Portland stone by Gill with his assistant, a chap called Donald Potter. The important thing about the look of them is that they can be appreciated from the ground. So the form is quite stylized, but they're very much, they've got the seahorse, the important tail there, and the way the abdomen comes out like that. They have a very Art Deco look about them, which is perfect for the time, and they themselves are very streamlined, like the building upon which they sit. I was looking online for a little bit more information about these, and the website midlandhotel.org suggested that these seahorses also seem to have a touch of the famous Morecambe Bay shrimp about them, which may or may not be intentional. But this, as I said, wasn't the only work of art that Gill was commissioned to produce. He was given 2 further commissions at the hotel. If you know the building, when you go inside the entrance tower there, at the top of the stairwell is a beautiful mural medallion of Triton. And the other work that he was involved with is this one, a map of the Northwest in the children's room at the Midland Hotel, which was incised in a kind of plaster called marplax. And it was then painted by Gill's son-in-law, Dennis Tegetmeister. So here you can see key landmarks. So we've got the Lake District, we've got the LMS railway here, we've got Blackpool Tower, over on, we've got Morecambe and Lancaster here behind, and obviously the Midland Hotel right in the centre, which looks like this. And here we have the seahorse. The interesting thing here is that we only have the seahorse. So this is not standing in, I don't think, for marine life in general, because there aren't other fishes or even sea monsters. It's very specifically the seahorse. So almost like it is part of the branding of the hotel. And that does really come out when you look in closer detail at this little flag up the top here, where there is another seahorse here, very small, but it's there. The seahorse is the symbol of the hotel, as it were. And indeed, this was taken up by other elements of design around the hotel. So in the entrance foyer, there is this mosaic on the floor by the textile artist Marion Dawn. And the seahorse was also used on the Midland Hotel's china, which was made by the Royal Colden Works in Stoke-on-Trent. So it's got this extremely stylish look, and I think the china is very much using Marion Dawn's design, but in those beautiful colours, it's so fantastically Art Deco, isn't it? So that's probably the best known example of our sort of decorative seahorses at the seaside. You possibly don't know this one so well. This is the design for Blackpool South Pier Pavilion, made by R.W. Hurst and D.R. Humphreys in the late 30s. So this was a new theatre designed, opened in 1938, so 6 years after the Midland Hotel. Here you see, this is an image from the architectural press. This sculpture right in the centre, that is a seahorse, which is not terribly easy to see in that front view, but perhaps you can see it a little better in this postcard view, because we've got the head here and then a curling tail at the bottom here. According to the Architect and Building News, the concrete seahorse surmounting the front elevation, which was cast in situ, is 12 foot high and is the work of G. Holman. Now, I hadn't come across G. Holman before, but I think this was George Alfred Holman, who was born in 1911, died in 1980, who was a sculptor and medalist. He studied art at the Hornsey School of Art under the sculptor Harold Youngman, and then went on to exhibit at the Royal Academy and other galleries. So not an insignificant person to be working on this commission. You can just about see on the side of the building here that there's some kind of decorative work, and I can show you what that looked like. It is horses riding on the sea. So not exactly seahorses, but interesting that that should have been chosen as the motive there. The architect and building news said, above a side view of the pavilion, this one, the decoration on the sidewall is formed in glazed tiles as a back to a ventilator, which you can see down the bottom here. And the walls in which the tiles are set are faced with rough stucco. Unfortunately, I don't know what colours these were, but I can show you the companion to this decoration inside. It's quite an impressive building inside. This was a theatre to seat 1,300 people, and it has what's called a diagrid ceiling, which is quite a rare construction technique of putting these sort of diagonal frame together. And then there's this other decoration which doesn't include seahorses, but it's not very well known and it's rather nice, so I thought I'd share it with you. The sidewalls are made of hardboard, and the decorative features too are formed by hardboard in various planes, and these, together with the fretted symbols to the centre lighting baffle and the glazed tile decorations externally, were designed by E.J. Thring, another name that's not terribly well known, but it demonstrates that all these artists, he was another artist, I think he did poster design as well, were working on these commissions at the seaside. So what about our seahorse that I started with? Well, it is still there. This concrete seahorse, I mean, it's rather obscured now by this front of the South Pier, but if you look round the edge, it's there. When I first saw it, I thought it was a lion because it seems to have this kind of mane on it, and something about the facial features is really just suggested lion to me. What I would really love to see is underneath this kind of tented canopy to know whether that original ceiling survived in there. But this is made of concrete, so I guess it's it's weathered the elements pretty well since 1938. So relieved to say that it is still there. So that's a pier example, and I do have a final pier example at Bournemouth Pier. So this is the Pier Theatre, designed by the Borough Architects Department, including the female architect Elizabeth Whitworth Scott, opened in 1960. And I thought, excellent, this is a great example. But when I looked back at my postcard, I couldn't see any seahorses here on this sort of contemporary image. But Anya very helpfully sent me a picture that showed the interior of the Pier Theatre with seahorses as part of the decoration there. So whether it was later or not, it seems to have been a theme within this building anyway, which is rather nice as a post-war example. And just to demonstrate very quickly that seahorses were used prior to the interwar years, these lovely examples from the Brighton Hippodrome. And of course, that makes sense, doesn't it? The idea of the hippodrome, hippo meaning horse, and we're in Brighton by the sea, so what better motif to use? These are more conventionally obvious seahorses, but in a way, the applied decoration of this stuck onto the walls sort of makes them more ephemeral than those sculpted examples. And that made me wonder if seahorses were more common as design motifs than we realise, and lots of them have been lost, perhaps, I don't know. This is the exterior of the Brighton Hippodrome at the moment, or quite recently, not looking very loved, but restoration work has been happening on the interior because there's this incredible circular ceiling by the theatre architect Frank Matcham of 1900. So very much hope that this will be open again in the not too distant future. Its last use was for bingo, so hopefully something better can be found. So really, this is just a sort of call to ask you if you might have seen any seahorses in seaside architecture design, maybe thinking what Mike said about seaside fashion. Were seahorses a motif in swimming costumes between the war and things? That's I've got to go and have a look at that now. So that's very brief introduction, but thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Yes, they're curious little creatures, seahorses, aren't they? I mean, but it became a real sort of design, I mean, it's quite niche thing, but it's what really interesting sort of one that people happen to pick up on. And to that end, I'm just going to go back through some of the chat comments and things in the chat. If you just give me a moment. Anya chipped in saying that there are examples of seahorses on the lampposts on Teignmouth Pier.
Okay.
And Rachel Ray asked, what was the name of the sculptor? I think it was relating to the Blackpool South Pier seahorse.
He was called George Alfred Holman, Holman,
right.
I believe. G. Holman, it said in the architectural press. So I think that was him.
And Pam wrote this note saying the directors of the LMS Rebuilding Committee suggested carving of seahorses would be more suitable than Hill's idea of two human figures.
Excellent, thank you.
More modest, I suspect, was probably behind that.
Yeah.
And jumping back to the beginning, Philip, hello Sidmouth, says, is the Wessex Newfoundland Association active in the fisheries context? There is a connection with the Sidmouth Folk Festival, another prospect for living heritage listing, he suggested. I think that's one for you, Bryce. Do you know anything about the Wessex Newfoundland Association?
I don't, but I do know that, there's a lot of architecture and so actually old buildings around that were built from the riches of British fishermen going over to Newfoundland in the last few centuries. So one on my doorstep, which I'm having a mental blank about. But anyway, if you go there, if my wife Jessica's still online, she can remind me what it is. But yeah, interestingly, a lot of people made a lot of money fishing the cod off Newfoundland, particularly back in the 1800s, and that money flowed back here. So I think that actually had a lot to do with Poole as well, developing as it did as an important port.
Yeah, I think I was reading
Country Park. There you go.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Yes.
I was reading, I think it was diaries about visiting Teignmouth in Devon, and during the summer season there was women's wrestling, because of course a wrestling competition, because all the men were off in Newfoundland working.
Right.
So let me sorry, I'm just going through this. And Phillips also mentioned the H.G. Wells short story, The Sea Raiders of 1901, features a giant squid washed up at Jacob's Ladder in Sidmouth. Brackets, apologies for yet another Sidmouth link. Keep them coming, Philip, we do like them. And you, Bryce, thanks. Put a link into Toilers at Sea, the octopus that ruled London. I've just opened it and I haven't been able to read it yet, but it looks really interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah. Diane Roberts says, interesting about the East Coast phenomenon. Earlier in the period we're studying, but in Grimsby and Cleethorpes were developing due to the coming of the railway, and Sir Edward Watkin, who's chairman of the railway company, was interested in educating the public about the sea, its creatures, and overfishing. He ensured that in the redevelopment of the pier gardens at Cleethorpes, he gave over some of the land for the North Sea exhibition, where curiosities were displayed, including a whale skeleton.
Mm-hmm.
So that's quite interesting. I know there was one. I think it was at Blackpool. There was a whale washed up at one point. I think at the end of the 19th century, and they left the carcass, and people paid to actually walk inside the whale, which just seems a rotting whale carcass. Which
there is no smell worse on earth than a rotting whale or
Well,
dolphin. I can tell
I
you
can
from
imagine.
experience.
Yeah.
So that is
Yeah.
very surprising.
Yeah. Kathryn, are you familiar with the one at Nansledan?
Nansledden.
Nansledden, apologies. Not quite on the
No,
seafront, just outside Newquay.
no, but I shall be investigating. Thank you.
And then it's not at the seaside, but the symbol of Newcastle upon Tyne is the seahorse. Well, it's almost the sea. The
Yeah.
60s Civic Centre has lovely seahorses on the roof of the tower, and the carpets have seahorses on them. Gateway to the little cemetery beside the General Hospital has a seahorse statue on it.
I love the sound of seahorse carpet. So, yeah, I'm going to check that one out too.
Yeah.
I also forgot to make the link in my talk that the logo of my organization, the Marine Biological Association, is a seahorse.
Yeah.
And we were formed in 1884, so just over 140 years old.
Yeah.
I don't know if the seahorse was there at the start. I'll have to have a look. And I don't think there's any seahorses carved or sculpted into our building, but next time I'm there, I'll have a look because it is the original building. So it's nearly 104 years old.
Yeah. Anya has put a reminder in the chat that the next seminar is on Seaside Gardens. That is on the 26th of March, and the link to book is there. I will put again my living heritage links again at the end in a minute. Thank you for the talks. And Pam has put a reference there if you want to pick this up.
Got it.
Kathryn,
Yeah.
Yep, that's fine.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Pam.
And Philip, again from Sidmouth, the seahorse caught in the fishing net was featured on the BBC Southwest News yesterday. So they're still in the news these days. Because, of course, one thinks of seahorses as being sort of some huge creature. They always look like they're sort of a big creature, but we know they're not. So I'm just going to say thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Anybody want to ask a question in person rather than just in the chat? Right, well, if nobody else has got to ask any questions, Maria
I've
said,
read that.
Okay. Oh, you're ahead
I'd
of me
recommend
all the
that
time.
too. Yeah.
Excellent.
The Essex Serpent. Yeah. That's a book including a sea monster. I guess that's one for you, Mike, but it's a good book. Yeah.
And of course, all the John Wyndham Kraken Wakes and all that. I grew up with that book, so I do enjoy that. But anyway, so I was just going to say thank you. And would you join with me in thanking the speakers today? Because I think it's been absolutely excellent, really interesting. I'm still getting over the octopus thing and the Third Reich linked to Nessie, but thank you very much for really, really interesting papers, the three of you. And I will see you again on the 25th of March, where we'll be talking about Seaside Gardens. So thank you for excellent talks today. Thanks for coming along, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
you very
you.
much.
Bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
many thanks.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.